Metroid has always been one of my favorite video game franchises since I was a kid. From Super Metroid to Fusion, all the way to the original. I've played almost every single one of them except for Dread. Please don't kill me. And the gameplay of Metroid has always been what sticks out to me with just how great the games flow together, with each game using a similar format because the combat and mechanics of the game before just worked so well. And the idea of being dropped off on some alien world with a whole planet for you to explore with little to no hand-holding has always been one of the biggest appeals to me, as it makes the world you're exploring just feel that much more alive than they would be without them. And the music surrounding these games have always brought those settings to life, with Super Metroid being a shining example of just how good music and ambience can be put together to make a once-of-a-kind experience work. And almost every single game in this series has been done extremely well, and the atmosphere almost gives it a similar feeling to The Legend of Zelda, but in space, which actually goes into the process of the making of this game. With the whole point of the game being created was to make a game similar to The Legend of Zelda, except it would be more so inspired by sci-fi films like Alien. And the influence Alien had on Metroid might be a little hard to see, but when looking back on the series, you might notice that the series had more elements to it that were horrific than you might actually remember. But before getting onto those elements, remember that if you like this video, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. I upload once a week, so if you want to get notified about the new video, make sure to hit the bell icon down below. And a quick note before the video starts, I will really be focusing only on the horrors of the 2D Metroid games in this video, as I feel like the horrors of 3D Metroid could be its own completely different video, as while a lot of the horror elements of the 2D Metroid games connect, the 3D Metroid games are a whole different beast when it comes to horror. And that's just to keep the video fair. It just feels like it would really only be fair to cover those, because while they use a lot of the same elements, it just isn't similar enough for me to cover them both at the same time, because the horror of the 3D Metroid games is just completely different. Now let's get on with the actual video. Starting off with the first game, there really isn't anything scary at first glance. The graphics are just way too low in order for the game to build the creepy atmospheres and ambience that the later entries were able to pull off. But there still is that feeling of emptiness that a lot of the later games are able to capitalize on when the graphical capabilities of the series got better with time. And capitalize that they would, with Metroid 2 really playing heavily into the horror elements that the first game wasn't able to, with the design of the Metroid enemies being really much more otherworldly than anything we saw in the first game. And the dark spaces due to the black and white color filters that the Game Boy was limited to made the atmosphere of the game much darker and down-putting than any other entries in the series thus far. And many of the Metroid bosses were much more alien in design, taking on such features as gaping maws and multiple eyes, with the Queen Metroid being the most disturbing one of them all, looking straight out of H.R. Geiger's handbook with outstretched neck and multiple layers of teeth and eyes. And that is with each monster in the game looking much more distinctly alien and unsettling than anything in the original game. And the environment of this game was much more cramped, making you feel like there was absolutely no place for you to run through, and gives the Metroid layer a almost ant colony type appearance than the open, sprawling sectors of the first game. And I think the tighter appearance of the world, as well as the more alien designs of the Metroids, really add to the horror ambience of the game, but I don't think we really reached the horror elements to the point of actually being somewhat creepy till Super Metroid. I always found the introduction sequence in Super Metroid to be quite unsettling, even when I was a kid, more so than most of the other 2D games that I played when I was younger. The introduction involves Samus leaving the Metroid that she captured from Metroid 2 with a group of scientists, where upon leaving she gets a distress signal from the base. However, upon arriving at the base, she finds every single scientist absolutely slaughtered, and the base looks like it's in complete disrepair, like some sort of beast went through the facility killing everyone one by one. And that is all shown in subtext. If you're really paying attention, you might not see what is frightening about it, but when you really think about it, there's just something unsettling about the atmosphere that the game traps you within. Then upon getting into the final room of the derelict base, you run into the Metroid before the eyes of Ridley appear over the Metroid as it runs away and causes the base to self-destruct. But while I see a lot of people focusing on the intro of the game for the creepy aspect, I think that the rest of the game still has some horrific implications throughout it. For example, when first landing in Zebes, the planet from the original game, we see that the world that was once completely full and overrun with monsters is now completely empty and doesn't have any traces of anything ever being there. We see the remains of the first game still left intact, with the old mother brain layers still there, completely destroyed and looking decayed like the first game happened a long time ago. And while getting missiles, you'll see your first Chozo statue, hitting that the planet might have once had some sort of civilization that now has been completely wiped away by the space pirates. And finally, the last horror element in this section is that upon going up the elevator, you'll notice that once completely still statues turn to look at you, showing that you are in fact not alone and that you've been watched the whole time you've been on this planet. The next horror element doesn't really happen till the first mini-boss, Spore Spawn, when this music kicks in. Which I don't know why this is, but I remember when I first played this game, the music really stuck out to me. And the reason it stuck out to me was that it was quite unsettling, as it makes it feel like there's something much more alien than normal. It's not epic sounding like a lot of the other bosses' music is, but instead much more like you have just walked into something that you shouldn't have. Then there's Kraid, which is intimidating just based off of pure size alone, being a kaiju-sized beast that takes up a whole room, followed by Crocomire, a lizard monster that upon defeat you shoot into an acid pit, causing him to melt into a skeletal form. Finally, there's Phantoon, a ghost squid creature straight out of a Lovecraftian science fiction story, with it being a multi-dimensional creature with a singular bloodshot eye. But while there are creepy elements to Super Metroid, no game would be able to hone the horror of the series better than Metroid Fusion. Unlike other games in the series with much more subtle forms of horror, Metroid Fusion blows the horror up of the franchise to a whole new level. First off, there's the X-Parasites themselves, a shape-shifting blob that upon attaching to a host, it kills them and replicates them into a horrific amalgamation of what they once were. With our introduction to the X-Parasites, we see it nearly kill Samus as they try to take over the suit she is wearing, and the only way that scientists are able to save her is by using Metroid DNA to fend it off, which in turn reveals that the Metroids were really the only main thing keeping the X-Parasites down in the first place. And to make things even worse, we have seen in the other games that we have completely wiped out the Metroid population, meaning that there is truly no way to defeat the X-Parasites. And we get to see the horrific creations of the X-Parasites from the very beginning of us being inside the taken over research station, with one of the first enemies that we run into being the zombie researchers, the corrupted bodies of the formerly human personnel in the research facility. And the game explains that the zombie researchers were most likely considered to be too weak for the X-Parasite and were most likely just used for their knowledge rather than as an actual fighting creature like all the other ones that we see in the game. So we know that the X-Parasite has almost completely taken over the entirety of the research base, and that with the way it behaves, it almost behaves like The Thing from John Carpenter's The Thing. Like in The Thing, the parasites also turn the infected into horrific amalgamations of what they once were and takes over a host that would be helpful to it. And we also see that the X-Parasite is also able to perfectly replicate creatures, which just like The Thing, could be used as some sort of infiltration unit in order to sneak its way into facilities. And the X-Parasites don't need to kill the subject in order to fully imitate them, which we see with the most horrific creature in the game by far. The SAX has got to be one of the most horrific villains put into an E-rated game, because wow, every single scene with it is just straight out of a horror film, with the very first thing that you notice is the loud footsteps it makes when walking into a sector. And unlike all the other enemies in the game, this one doesn't have a distinctly alien appearance to it, instead being an almost perfect replica of you. With every single power-up that you had from Super Metroid and early on in the game, you have nowhere near the amount of resources to consider even taking it on. And it makes you think, is this how every other creature in the other games felt upon seeing Samus? Pure existential dread of something that could easily kill you? Because while it's small in stature, it has the weapons arsenal of an army on its own. And unlike every other enemy that you have to face in the game, you cannot fight back against it. You must hide from the monster. There is no more fighting back against this creature. It's just way more armed and indestructible in comparison to all the other creatures within the game. And if it does happen to spot you, there is no escaping it unless you can really outsmart it. It will stop at nothing in order to make sure you are truly dead. And upon entering a restricted area, you find out they have been breeding Metroids in the facility, but while exploring the facility you run into the SAX, which gets killed by the Metroids, but when running away, Adam reveals this. Then there's the actual fight against the SAX, which while difficult is more like you are actually just fighting a version of yourself, before it of course, instead of accepting defeat when you get it down on its knees, it instead turns into this. This part is straight out of The Thing, as the monster is one of the most disturbing in any of the Metroid games thus far, as you realize this thing isn't even close to normal, as it breaks away any chance of being seen as human. But would it surprise you to say that the SX isn't even truly the creepiest part of this game? No, that goes to how the game builds up the bosses in this game. First off, there's Ceres, which before the fight is shown that it moves extremely quickly and that it lives in water, which the area is completely covered in, meaning that it could quite literally be anywhere within the facility. And right before the Ceres fight, we see a pile of bones that resemble what we heard about the Ceres, and meaning that we know that the original creature does not actually remain. This is going to be some strange and horrific version of it that the X-Parasite has created. And the next boss that raises the fear level is the creature of Nightmare, inside of the frozen area of Sector 5, and while exploring the area of Sector 5, we see behind the windows Nightmare's silhouette flying extremely quickly from one edge of the screen to the another. Then later on within Sector 5, we see that the windows that was once keeping Nightmare out are now completely shattered, leaving the level of protection completely gone as the beast has now completely escaped. And after seeing Nightmare, the worst possible outcome is confirmed as the beast is able to control gravity, and upon attacking the gravity controller, his faceplate will start oozing a green slime out of his eye holes, and then upon destroying the gravity controller, his faceplate explodes off, revealing this. And as you damage his face, it melts more and more to the point to essentially just becoming a pile of sludge, and after killing it, once again it's shown to be another X-Parasite, showing that no matter what you kill, everything here is essentially being controlled by the X-Parasite. And finally, it's revealed that the Federation actually sent you here to keep it under control in order to use it for future purposes, rather than just eliminating the X-Parasite completely and saving the world from it. This twist reminds me extremely of Alien, where it's revealed that Mother actually knew about this the whole time, and that they sent them to the planet for grabbing the creature and bringing it back for weapon purposes. And overall, this really ends up to making Metroid Fusion one of the best examples of horror in the Metroid series. Every single part of Metroid Fusion seems straight out of a film. This doesn't seem as much a sci-fi action game with horror elements and straight up just a horror game. But those are all just my thoughts, and why I think the Metroid series is one of the best examples of mixing horror into your science fiction franchise due to the subtle ways it's able to make the player uncomfortable. And if you agree, let me know down below and I'll see you all next week.